Good afternoon, guys. It is a beautiful Friday afternoon, and this is Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I'm your host, Britt Flinn. Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode. Please, if you're in the chat, I would love to hear from you. And while you're there, hit that like and subscribe button. That way, you get notified every time we have a new show coming up. Hairs on a bun. It's hot today. I hope that you guys are staying cool, hopefully in a pool with maybe a Mai Tai or even a pina colada in your hand, because it is Fantasy Friday happy hour. We will be joined with Jeff Bell from Football Guys and Dynasty Royale or Devy Royale, excuse me, to talk about some of the keeper strategies, the dynasty sells, a lot of stuff going on here. We've also got a ton of NFL news as we get closer and closer to the season. We're going to recap the preseason games from last night, as well as some of the matchups tonight and what we want to see. Dustin, great to see you in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. But let's go ahead and get right into it. The elephant in the room that we have to kick it off with is Trey Lance. So after Sam Darnold was announced as the backup quarterback to Brock Purdy a couple of days ago, Lance went home for the day and the trade rumors swirled. While the 49ers brass has come out and said that there is, quote, a good chance that Lance remains with the team, that really hasn't stopped everyone and their mother from speculating on trade landing spots. I actually put out an article yesterday on fantasyalarm.com talking about some potential landing spots for the third-year quarterback. And one of them, which I feel is kind of sneaky, is the Washington Commanders. They've got new ownership. Eric Bieniemy is now in as the offensive coordinator. And I think that they could make a move for a developmental player. Let me know in the chat if you think that that's a possibility. And you can check out the whole piece over on fantasyalarm.com. Dame Scampers, great to see you guys in the chat as well. Great to have y'all here on this beautiful Friday. In other news, the Browns have also traded Josh Dobbs to the Cardinals. That kind of makes me think that Kyler Murray may be a little more behind in his rehab than we've been told, or they may not even play him at all this year and be totally in on tank mode. I think that they're going to look to trade him possibly because of that monster contract that he got. And there's a lot of good talent coming out in this NFL draft for 2024, the number one name being Caleb Williams. Now, Williams has said a couple of days ago that he's not even sure that he's going to declare. So that could throw a wrench into their plans if they are planning on tanking for him. But we'll just have to wait and see how their season plays out. They are the biggest underdogs in the odds to win their division. Nobody really thinks that they're going to do much. So it's going to be interesting. And seeing Josh Dobbs getting brought over there just adds another wrinkle to an already puzzling offense. In other trade news, the Giants acquired former first-round pick Isaiah Simmons from the Cardinals for only a seventh-round pick. Simmons has been an extremely versatile defender who wasn't bad. It's just that the Cardinals could never figure out which position to play him in. They played him everywhere over the field. They played him as safety. They played him as defensive end a couple times, I think, as a linebacker, as a corner. I think that if the Giants can find a sweet spot for him, that they got an absolute steal. And Coop in the chat saying he thinks that thought Isaiah Simmons was going to be so good. I think that he still can be. I think that it was just that the Cardinals couldn't really figure out what to do with him. And he never found his groove since they were moving him around from place to place to place within that defense. Rookie news, rookie receiver Jordan Addison is pleading guilty to the speeding incident that happened earlier this summer. The reckless driving charge will be dismissed, which is good, but he will lose his driver's license for 6 months. The good news for him, though, is that it was knocked down to a petty misdemeanor, so he shouldn't face any discipline from the league, which is great news, especially seeing how much he's developed with Kirk Cousins, how explosive he's been in the preseason, and how Kevin O'Connell loves to run that offense. Finally, Josh Jacobs has still not reported to camp or signed his tender. Reports have been coming out saying that he's not going to hold out, but there is still so much uncertainty around him about whether he's going to be ready for week 1. Another running back, Jonathan Taylor of the Colts, reportedly has until only Tuesday to find a trade partner. And while several outlets have reported that the Miami Dolphins have made an offer to him, head coach Mike McDaniel shut that down in his typical quirky way, saying that he thought that his 2-year-old made that report. So it doesn't exactly give you a lot of confidence that that is something or someone that the Dolphins are actually pursuing. Some popcorn headlines. I don't know if we've got the popcorn sound, but if we don't, just imagine it in your mind. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator Dave Canales says that he believes that Kyle Trask has real starting level potential. After naming Baker Mayfield the starter, should he be worried and looking over his shoulder that he can be replaced throughout the season? Speaking of that Trey Lance trade article, the Bucks may be in there as potential trade candidates if they can't get something going with either Mayfield or Trask. So, our final piece of popcorn news, an energized Ezekiel Elliott is ready to show that he still has gas left in the tank. And from what we've heard out of training camp, Elliott's been utilized heavily in goal line situations as well as in the passing game. I don't know if this will dramatically affect Ramondre Stevenson if Zeke is just used in short yardage situations, but Stevenson's projected touchdowns should probably be lowered just a little bit since Elliott has been so good over the past few seasons at scoring touchdowns. Finally, some injury news before we get to the preseason. Jerry Jeudy was unfortunately carted off during yesterday's practice with what was deemed to be a hamstring injury. We're still awaiting results on the MRI, but at a minimum, it's going to keep him out several weeks. This Broncos receiving core is getting thinner by the day. So Marvin Mims is immediately going to have a role in this offense, at least for the first part of the season. And now we can even start looking at tight end Greg Dulcich and even Samaje Perine in the passing game. I know that Adam Troutman is currently listed as the tight end one on the Broncos depth chart, but we've seen it over and over and over again. If you're a blocking tight end, you're going to be listed as the tight end one. The passing tight end is still going to be in there, still get reps, still get targets. And Dulcich was so good in the minimal amount of games that he played last season that I think that he could be, at risk of sounding like a broken record, the Joker in Sean Payton's offense. All right, let's get to some preseason games because football is getting closer and closer and closer. Anthony Richardson looked confident in his role as a starter, even going so far as to do the fly Eagles fly after they scored a touchdown. His passing can still use some improvement as he only went 6 of 17, but those 6 completions went for 78 yards, and he also added on 38 rushing yards. That development is going to come in the passing game, and he already looks with that rushing upside like he can be a viable fantasy quarterback. Deion Jackson of the Colts may also be locked up for the Colts backup running back job, and he may even end up being the starter if Jonathan Taylor is traded. He took every snap with the starters on the first 2 drives, and he was the one who even ran it in for the touchdown when they were in the red zone. So keep an eye out for him. Another guy on the Colts to keep an eye out on is rookie Josh Downs out of North Carolina. I've talked about him over and over about how well he fits into Shane Steichen's offensive scheme. And we kind of saw that last night. He was the starter in 11 personnel sets. He operated out of the slot. And it's not a huge surprise, but it is a very interesting development from where he is still going in drafts and in ADP. He definitely has a pathway to fantasy production and should be looked at as a late round sleeper. Finally, for the Eagles, it looks like they're trying to keep 4 running backs on their roster, with Rashad Penny potentially being the 4th on the depth chart. However, Trey Sermon may be the odd man out, but he's looked very good in the preseason. So that decision is going to be very difficult to make. And with the roster cutdowns coming over the next week, it's going to be something that we have to monitor. Before we get to the Steelers and Falcons, I want to answer one of the questions in the chat. Need all your help. Got to drop Zeke or Cortland to get a crummy streaming tight end before week 1. What do I do? I think as much as I love Zeke, that you have to drop him. With all the injuries to the Broncos wide receiver room, Sutton is going to have a big role. Howard Bender and I have actually gone back and forth about this as well, about who's going to be the number one receiver in Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi's offense. Because in the past, they have tended to target that big X receiver, and that's what Cortland Sutton is. I think he has way much more upside than Ezekiel Elliott does. And even if you have to stream that tight end, Zeke may be out there on the waiver wire and you can pick him back up. So that is what I would do. If any of you guys in the chat have a different opinion, please throw it in there. We love a variety of opinion and some discourse. All right, moving on to the Steelers and Falcons game last night. Kenny Pickett, who admittedly I was kind of out on, looks so much more improved. And George Pickens is going to terrorize this league. I'll be the first to admit, I thought that Pickens was going to have a bit of a tougher season because of Kenny Pickett's low depth of target, but that kind of looks to have changed. Yes, they were playing against the Falcons backups, but just the confidence to throw it deep was something that Pickett didn't have last season. And I really think that he's going to develop and make this offense kind of a sneaky play in the AFC North. Another sneaky play on the Steelers is Jaylen Warren. The Jaylen Warren hype train isn't slowing down anytime soon, despite Matt Canada saying that Najee Harris is unequivocally the starter. Last night, Warren got 2 carries to Harris's 4, and he didn't see a target, but his explosiveness is still keeping people dialed in as a late round fantasy target. Another guy on the Steelers offense that people have kind of been in on because of the training camp videos and preseason hype that we all love to see is Darnell Washington. Unfortunately, he continues to play with the twos and only shows up in 2 tight end sets. So it does look like Pat Freiermuth is a lock to maintain his tight end 1 role, especially in those red zone and 2-minute drill situations. All right, we've got a couple of games on tonight. Very exciting. There's 3 games actually on the slate tonight: the Lions Panthers, the Patriots and Titans, and the Chargers and 49ers. So, what should we be watching for tonight? I know a lot of these teams are resting their starters, but that doesn't mean that there's not things that we can still glean from these games. So, like I mentioned, the Lions aren't playing any of their starters tonight. So, everything is falling on this Carolina Panthers offensive line and if they can keep Bryce Young upright. He's had a super rough start in the preseason because his line cannot keep defenders away. If he can't get something going against the Lions backup, then it's going to be a rough season for the number 1 overall pick. Another question that I'm looking for is, what will the Patriots offensive line look like? They have several rookies and other young players on their roster who have been kind of up and down during the preseason. So we need to see them develop to have a little more faith in an already questionable offensive line. For the Titans on the other side, we need to see Malik Willis and Will Levis and see their development. Ryan Tannehill is getting older and he was injured last season. So they really need a competent backup in that system. And I'm not quite sure yet which one of these guys it's going to be. For the 49ers, it's again the elephant in the room. How will Trey Lance look? And will he have some trade suitors if he has a decent performance? Or are they going to decide to keep him and give him another year, another chance to see if he can finally develop into that 3rd overall pick that they all thought that he could be? We've got all of this training camp news, all of these injury updates over on fantasyalarm.com as part of the draft guide. The cheat sheet was also updated today. I know a ton of you guys are going into your drafts this season. So go over to fantasyalarm.com/draft guide to pick that up. You get the draft guide and the cheat sheet included. If you just want the cheat sheet, you can also purchase that. Or if you're interested in everything that the site has to offer, I'm talking DFS generators, NASCAR, which is back at Daytona this weekend. Baseball is going into the final month of their regular season. We've got it all. If you want access to the All Pro package, go to fantasyalarm.com/allpro. And you also get a 7-day free trial when you sign up today. All right, guys, let's bring in our very special guest who I'm very excited to have on today. Jeff Bell of Football Guys, Devy Royale, and an FSWA member. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm good, Britt. How are you?
I'm good. It's hot, but it's that time of year. I can't tell if it's hot because of the air outside or because it's football season and we're all fired up about it, you know?
Well, and I think there was a heat wave that came through, a massive heat wave came through Columbus. That's where I live, and it's just been brutal this past week. But yeah, it's those last gasps of summer, and you're just kind of ready for football season to start.
Yes, I want that cool chill of fall. I want, the crisp mornings. It just something about how that weather feels lets you know that it's football season. And I saw you at the expo, albeit very briefly, because we were just running around like crazy people at the expo. But it was great to meet you in person. You've been on our Lightning Round podcast before. So I'm very thankful and appreciative of you coming on my solo show to talk some football. But before we get into some of your articles and all the great work that you do over on Football Guys. This is Friday Fantasy Happy Hour. So I just kind of want to like discuss a couple of
Yeah.
smaller topics. I've already brought up Trey Lance multiple times. I think that that is the hot topic. I want to know, as a Dynasty and a Devy guy, what is your opinion on him?
Coming into the league, I think we all kind of knew he was very raw. He just hadn't had those reps. And I think that we're seeing now one of the big things with Brock Purdy he was a college starter for 4 years. And so he's seen so many different situations that Trey Lance has not been able to see. I think development has really struggled with San Francisco. I don't know that there could have been a worse team that he got put with, given that they're pushing so hard for the Super Bowl. They wanted to develop him as this extra weapon that could add more into the offense, but stuck behind Jimmy Garoppolo his rookie year. And then last year, he did get all the starter work through camp. He had that monsoon in that first game. Then he was injured in that second game. So really what we've seen 4 games of football. One of those he played really well. One of those he was injured in. One was a rainstorm and one was just bad. And so it blows my mind that they're ready to move on at this point, but they're also in this window where they're trying to win the Super Bowl. And Kyle Shanahan is the type of coach that he expects his offense to be run one way. And so Brock Purdy is the player that's capable of doing that. And he even apparently likes Sam Darnold's capability of doing that even more than Trey Lance's. And so my real opinion is that it's time for Trey Lance to get a change of scenery.
And that's what I was going to ask you too, because it does seem like there are some conflicting reports with their front office saying that there's a good chance that he's going to remain with the team, but Shanahan and everybody else seems to indicate that he's going to be traded. So, which side do you fall on as to where he ends up?
It seems like there's a big push pull right now between John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan on who really is in control in San Francisco. And so I think that Kyle Shanahan's pushing to get Trey Lance traded to remove that distraction from the locker room. But also it kind of makes John Lynch look bad if he were to trade all that they gave up to get Trey Lance 2 years ago, and you trade Trey Lance for a 4th-round pick. I mean, that puts, if it doesn't work with the other quarterbacks, John Lynch is squarely on the firing seat there. Whereas I think John Lynch would love the opportunity, one, to have that depth, because we saw the 49ers get into that NFC Championship game and really fall apart at the quarterback position, even as the season went along. They seem snake bit at the position. So understandable to want a solid quarterback 3 right now, but also you want that situation where you can solidify or redeem, if it's possible, any level of trade value and kind of get out of this while you look decent. I think the probably you don't ever want to see anybody hurt, but like the opportunity for Trey Lance to actually get into the game, play for a period of time, and then allow the 49ers to maybe get a speculative 1st-round pick down the road, or maybe even a 2nd-round pick they could feel good about before they shift back to Brock Purdy and him being the face of the franchise, is probably the way they would like to end up.
Yeah, I think that it's very interesting, especially with the rule now that the NFL is going to allow you to have 3 quarterbacks on your roster. It's like, why not give this guy another chance? Because you've already just crapped on this guy totally
Yeah.
throughout the league. So, how much are you actually going to recoup if you do trade him? So, it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. And we'll all have our ear down to the ground, waiting with bated breath.
Yeah.
But I want to switch over to something that I saw the other day on your Twitter account, and I thought that it was very interesting. You know, football can tend to take over a lot of our lives, especially as analysts and content creators and things like that. And you put out a very wonderful tweet on how you balanced content and your family and had some very great points. And I just kind of wanted to touch on that and see what some of your tips were, not just for us who have been in it for a little bit, but maybe people who are starting out brand new?
I think one of the biggest things that I was guilty of that I saw happening was just it's so easy to grab Twitter when you're doing something else and to open it up and to have that and not be present in that moment. And one of those things that I'm in the room with my kids, and if I grab my phone and do Twitter, yeah, they might be playing with something, but I'm missing that time. And so understanding and compartmentalizing, really kind of sectioning off your time that to say, okay, I do have legitimate downtime now. I can get on Twitter or whatever. I can do what I want to do, or things need to be done right now. Either I need to get my kids to bed. I need to give them that bath. I need to unplug with them. I need to get their homework done, whatever it might be. And so really striking that balance and being aggressive and setting boundaries, I think is the biggest thing. That when it comes to balance is boundaries. And I've heard somebody say that, and I think it makes a lot of sense, but that's where it starts, and that's where really it ends.
Yeah, I think that that's excellent advice, especially as somebody who started out and I was like, up till 3 a.m. writing articles. And then
Yeah.
I would wake up for like a morning shift or a lunch shift or whatever. And just it burns you out really quickly. And we do this because it's fun, right? We don't want to stop having fun. We don't want to be burned out. And so that's excellent advice. And you always do such a good things with your platform, sharing the pros with Joes. You shared everybody, I think, that is up for nominations or donations. But I want to get into yours because it's something that I haven't heard of. And then I
Yeah.
researched a little bit more into it. And it's really an awesome charity. So, how did you get involved with Dolly Parton's Imagination Library? And just tell everybody a little bit about it who may not know what it is.
So what it is kids get a book every single month mailed to them. And so what this library does is you sign your kid up at age 0. Every single month they will get a new book mailed to them, and up until the age of 5. And so, I mean, you can do the math there. For 5 years, you're getting books. You're getting 70 plus books mailed to you throughout that stretch. And they are very they do a very good job of like gearing. Here's a 1-year-old. Here's maybe a board book that would fit their age range, and they do a very good job of gearing it up throughout the ages so that kids always have something coming that they can engage with. And so accessibility of that program, I think, is really important to me because you're getting resources into the hands of people that might not be able to get those resources otherwise. And that's really the backbone of what it is. And I found it. My mom actually found it. And the thing of it is she lives in an area that she's eligible for it, but I live in an area that I'm not eligible for it. So she's able to sign my kids up where she lives, but still get the book sent to my house. And so she signed all 3 of my girls up. And now my oldest is 8 and she's out of the program. It's up to age 5. My middle is 5. And so she just left it. And so we've just got the 1-year-old in it still. But throughout those last even 8 years now, we've just had books every month coming to our house. And it's just fun because kids love getting mail and kids love getting that new thing, and you don't know what it's going to be, but it allows you to build a library for your kids as it goes through. And you have multiple kids, you can build a pretty expansive library.
That's so cool. As somebody who was a bookworm and a nerd,
Yeah,
the scholastic book fairs don't exist anymore in schools, and that breaks my heart that that's such a 90s and millennial thing.
it
So
is.
having this where you can still get physical copies of books is just such a great learning tool and a really awesome charity. So guys, go check out Pros with Joe's. Check out everybody's great foundations that they are raising money for, but especially go check out the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. And before we transition into the hardcore fantasy talk, you're big into Devy. And I love that as a college football fan, as somebody who has grown up in a college town, basically. How much does doing Devy help you in NFL fantasy?
Well, one, I'm like you, so I'm in a college town too. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, so I'm a Buckeye, and so that's always been a key tenet of my life. And so I've loved college football, and I've always loved the NFL draft, and so it allows you to kind of bridge that gap, adding into the fantasy element of. I've played NFL for 20 plus years now, and so having the Devy aspect that really brings it into the college game, bridging over into the draft. And so it's just kind of another thing to watch on Saturdays, another thing to pay attention to. I think playing college fantasy can be very, very difficult, especially if you're playing it with people that are very experienced, or if you do DFS, whatever it might be, because news is not readily available. It's just can be very hard to figure out where production is going to go. We see these massive blowouts in college where if a guy doesn't get his 3 touchdowns in the first half or the first quarter, even the backups are playing an entire half game, and so there's all kinds of these screwy things. But Devy kind of bridges that gap because you're really doing that scouting in Devy, and you're really looking for those guys early that will be part of the draft process. And we do a tremendous amount of draft coverage. And with the Football Guys Dynasty show, we put out the Football Guys Rookie Guide last year. And so we're very ingrained in the rookies that are upcoming. And where that benefit comes in is playing in my Dynasty leagues. And it's less so like having those specific players and trying to be like, well, I have the 103, that means I'm going to get player X. And it's a lot more so knowing, okay, there's the tier break here in this class is at pick 5, and I'm trending right now towards having the 8th pick. Can I do a little deal right now in October, November that maybe the other owner isn't exactly paying attention to that, and pay a minimum price to do that? Whereas once we get into those rookie drafts, you get through the draft, you get into the rookie season, we all see it where everybody decides this is tier break is tier 6. You've got pick 8. No, I'm not moving, or I expect a massive haul to be able to do that. And so that's where the true benefit, I think, of Devy lies, is positioning yourself for when those players are in those rookie drafts.
And that's why we have you on the show, because you're so savvy. I will say, doing college football projections, and then this year I'm in the FSGA first college football fantasy league with 18 teams, 30 rounds. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
I was like, I thought I knew college football, and then getting into that, whew, that is wild. So very much appreciate your insight and all the work that you do for that, because it is very valuable, especially in Dynasty, which admittedly I'm not very good at. I'm just trying to get better.
You're getting better. That's all it is improving and
Um,
getting better, and minimizing the mistakes, and getting big upside, big rewards.
yeah, I'm too impatient. This is why I like redraft. I don't like
I get
building a
it.
team. I want immediate gratification, and it's so hard for me to be patient with Dynasty leagues.
I get it.
Yeah. But you have a new article over out on Football Guys that I enjoyed thoroughly, because as most of us have our drafts coming up this weekend, some of them are keeper leagues. And keeper leagues can be a little bit confusing if you don't know how to look for value, what exactly you're looking for in your keeper. Um, so the value aspect is the first thing that I want to touch on. Where is the line drawn between keeping a good player or taking more value, thinking that you can get the same player as part of your draft and just take that value elsewhere?
I mean, I don't know. We want to teach process as much as we can, I think, involved in fantasy. But I do think that there are certain elements of fantasy that are feel versus process. And so you kind of have to feel those types of things out. And so one of the big things that I talked about in that article that I really believe in is figuring out that keeper pool for your league, figuring out where your draft picks are going to lie, mapping out a strategy a little bit, and recognizing that, okay, I really want a stud quarterback, but I know that Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, they're all going to be kept. Joe Burrow, maybe, because, that's a real potential because of the value change that we've seen from in redraft for quarterbacks in this year relative to where they sat last year. That could happen. And so you might be sitting there with Justin Fields and weighing, okay, is this my only chance to have this elite quarterback? Because I think that the thing of it is one, your league mates are probably doing out that mapping as well. But two, you're stepping into that draft, and already people are saying in their head, more so than any normal redraft, okay, I can't get Mahomes, I can't get Josh Allen, I can't get Jalen Hurts, I still want a quarterback. And I think that you're going to see those types of players go off a little bit higher than what you would expect in ADP.
Yeah, we've seen quarterbacks get pushed up the board like crazy
Yeah.
this year. And I don't know if that's an effect of best ball kind of trickling into redraft leagues and things like that. But it's been very hard to wait on quarterback, which has been the traditional move. And you guys put out a graphic over at Football Guys, your best 2023 keeper values. And this is such a great tool for me. Like you mentioned, Justin Fields and how much of an ADP difference that you get him at if you keep him. Um, in my experience, most keeper leagues have you keep them in the same round that you drafted them, or maybe a round before. And then if you keep them for years, then that can kind of increase. But you've got a ton of heavy hitters on here. I mean, Jalen Hurts, what go is that? Sorry, I'm little. The 58 change in
Yeah.
ADP. I mean, that's insane. Justin Fields, an ADP change of 121. Christian Watson, all of these guys who returned a ton of value last season, we're now seeing being kept. And where does this, I guess, what's your process for evaluating value? Is it only ADP, or is it, do you look at their future projections? Is it kind of a little bit of a mix of both? Or how do you figure out the best keepers?
So for this exercise, I just used ADP because that kind of gave you a hard line, and it's really an inexact science because don't think there's a lot of keeper content out there, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to do this, because I was getting a ton of questions about keepers, and I don't see a lot of keeper content coming out. And so I wanted to try to figure out a way that you can kind of show these value shifts, and I think you can learn a lot from doing that, because you can learn, and you see this, and one of the things we already talked about, quarterback value shift, and you see it in real time on this, where you see these guys are going so much higher. And the other thing on this, if you're not a quarterback, you're almost guaranteed to be a second year player on this list, it seems like, or a very young player on this list. And I think that speaks to the drafting young when you are in redraft, and kind of like people discourage a dynasty mindset in redraft. But the reality of it is the most mispriced assets in redraft are going to be those young players who are better or more involved than what we're expecting out of redraft to happen. And that's where you really win leagues and create differences. And so that's the other thing that this chart shows. If you dive into the article, the scary thing is how many players dropped off very hard in ADP. And I think that you see it all the time in conversation, or you're going through drafts and like people are just so sure that the top 12 players in ADP are all going to be the top 12 players. But the reality of it is you're going to have 1, 2, 3 of those guys that are just not going to have good years, and that might look forward that values them very differently moving forward. And so marrying that all together, using that in your redraft leagues to see those values and to see where those trends lie one year to the next, and then marrying that into dynasty and seeing how that value can shift relative one year to the next, and what assets do you want to move off of after seeing that.
Yeah, keeper leagues are such a fun way to just marry the two. And that's where I found, I think, I said I was impatient with dynasty.
Yeah.
Keeper leagues I really enjoy because it is a good marriage of the two. In the past, I think my first keeper league, I was like, oh, I'm just going to chase value instead of like keeping the, Christian McCaffreys or whoever that I could keep. And I got bit by that a couple times because it doesn't always work out. So what you're saying is that it is a process, and just know the process.
Yeah, but it's difficult because it's very, like I said again, it's an inexact science, because while that is 2022 ADP, one, you might see some differences because I think in keeper naturally you're going to see younger players valued more relative to what your league rules might be. And so knowing that, two, you're dealing with depleted rounds unless it's year one of a keeper. And so it can be very difficult to create mass content to fill all those niches. And so that's where Football Guys is great, that we have the draft dominator. And so to use that draft dominator, you can go in, you can import your league, you can make the keepers. And when I talk about mapping out the rest of the keepers in your league, you can set those draft picks, and then you can see, okay, like these are going to be the players that are going to be available. You can start to work ahead and develop those tiers, and that maybe you want to move within those tiers. But it's so much fun, because if you're really into fantasy, and you're not like us making content and involved in trenches in that, and you're not making your own rankings or those types of things, there's only so much you can do outside of just consuming content to plan for your leagues. If you're just in a simple redraft league, or I don't mean simple, but if you're just that type of format, because you don't know how the draft's going to play out. For sure, you can look at ADP, but once you're in that room, we've all seen things that we didn't expect. But keeper is that different level where you can do that prep work and feel a little bit more comfortable walking in that room and have a little bit more of a plan. Now you can also get in trouble if you're too rigid with that plan and it goes off the rails, and now you're worried you're scrambling. So there is a balance, but I think it's more involved for obviously it's more involved for just kind of players out there that are looking for that extra level up.
Yeah, everybody who's played in a home league knows that there's this one guy who's going to take their homer pick and it's going to completely throw your plan out the window. But you mentioned something very important in there that I want to touch on, and that was mapping out your opponent's keepers. And that way you can kind of figure out almost what their draft plan is going to be by who they're keeping, where they're keeping them. So, how much advantage do you think that you gain by mapping out your opponent's keepers?
I think you gain a huge advantage because one of the other things that comes with mapping out those keepers, and so if I'm playing in a keeper league, I'm loading up at the end of the year on guys that might have been dropped because of injury or whatever that I'm expecting to have keeper value next year. If you do that correctly, and maybe you can only keep 3, but you're holding 5 very good guys on your roster right now, and you know you're going to have to cut 2 good guys, you can go to those league mates that maybe they have 2 good keepers and they just don't, you can see it's obviously they don't feel good about that third one. You can offer that player that you're just going to toss back in the pool, and if draft pick trading is allowed in your league, you're going to give that guy up anyways, and depending on where your position, you might not get him back anyways, and you're thinking, well, there's going to be 36 keepers or 48 keepers, whatever it is, that are taken anyways, so you can really get something for nothing out of some of those trades. If you do that, you approach the right person, and I think it's a lot more easy to pull off trades. I think in redraft we all struggle to do trades, and dynasty can be hit or miss on that, but keeper, you really are able to create situations where I'm really giving up nothing, I'm gaining something, but it's still more beneficial to you than if you didn't do this trade.
Yeah, and you touched on something there too. Going to the waiver wire and picking up players that people have dropped. I specifically did that this year in my big money home keeper league because we're allowed to keep one vet and one rookie. My team was decimated with injuries last year, and so I didn't have any rookies that I could keep. So I start scouring the waiver wire. Sky Moore is out there, and he was drafted in the 12th round of this particular league. On Underdog, he's going in an ADP of 90. So I'm already getting value there, and I scooped him up off the waiver wire for free. Like,
Yes.
it's don't be afraid to go out there and do some bargain shopping, especially in your keepers. Like, who you have doesn't necessarily mean that that's who you have to keep. So who I'll finish this up. Obviously, you have your best value keepers that we put on the screen, but who are some of your favorite guys overall this year?
My favorite guys overall this year, like my guys. So when I did my projections and the guys that worked out relative to ADP that I'm high on, James Cook with Buffalo is a guy that I'm high on. J.K. Dobbins with Baltimore is a guy that I'm high on. DJ Moore from Chicago was one that worked out to be higher than ADP. Dalton Kincaid was another one, tapping back to Buffalo again. And you can see behind me, I'm a Bills fan. I follow the Bills pretty closely. And I think relative to what I'm seeing in ADP out there versus how they're going to use James Cook and Dalton Kincaid, I'm high on both of those guys. And it's not homerism stepping in, but it is something that I am a little bit closer to that team than to most teams. But I did have a tweet the other day, and I cannot even remember the other guys that are on the list, but I went through my underdog, just my underdog exposure where I was sitting, and kind of it's obvious, okay, well, you have these 3 running backs and these 3 wide receivers that are you 18, 19, 20% or above exposure. It's like, okay, well, those are my guys. Like, this is where I put the money on, and that's where I drafted. So that's kind of what I figured out there.
Yeah, it's so hard to get Dalton Kincaid now because he's been so steamed up, but
Yeah.
you are one of the few analysts who's in on him. I feel like a lot of analysts think that the rookie tight ends don't ever work out in year one. It's kind of, wormed into their brain. But Kincaid has such a great role as a
Yeah.
pass catching option in that Buffalo offense. I'm with you. I absolutely love him. Um, so let's move on to some dynasty sell now, because
Yeah.
we know that we're not selling Dalton Kincaid, but there are a couple guys who you've put out in articles that you think that we should sell before the season starts. So what are some of the factors that go into labeling somebody as a sell now?
One of the big things that I look at is kind of that age range. And so I'd look at 2 real keys on sell nows are either, I guess maybe more than 2 rookies, but what I'm thinking about right now is, so Hollywood Brown, I labeled him as a sell now, and looking at that, he's 26. He's going to be bridging that gap into a little bit older player. I think it's going to be pretty brutal right now this year in Arizona when it comes to fantasy production. And so it's so easy in Dynasty for that narrative to flip. And it's interesting because one of the things that I do in this series is I go to keep trade cut and I look at players like the historical trends on where they've gone up and down. And so like a guy like Cam Akers is my latest one that I put out. And so Cam Akers was Dynasty RB 58 in November last year, right before he had his strong run. Like he was just done. And now he's steamed up to the point where he's landing as a mid to strong RB2 option. And so that's a situation where we're reading the tea leaves one way, and if it doesn't work that way, is he going to drop all that value again immediately that we've already seen happen? And so looking at those types of things, who is expected to lose value? And it doesn't always have to be an older player that I think could lose value, but it's really just trying to capture those windows. And oftentimes I try not to be like contrarian on purpose, but I do think that when you're seeing buzz around a player that if you're on Twitter or whatnot, and you're seeing hype around them, those kind of create sell situations for me in Dynasty where you might have a little bit more intrinsic value applied to a player because of what the talk is about them. And that production is just not going to be there.
Yeah, Cam Akers is an interesting one because I feel like people, when looking at him, that they think, what have you done for me lately? Rather than what have you done for me over the past year? They see those final 3 weeks that he had that were really, really good and they're super stoked on him. But the Rams offense as a whole this year, I'm not too excited about them. I mean, their offensive line has questions. We say it all the time that running is the luxury of the winning team. I think, they're going to have a hard time winning games. And so that's a great point in selling Cam Akers. I know you also have Brock Purdy as a sell now candidate. I'm bringing up Trey Lance again. That should have just been the photograph of the entire show. But is he still a sell after the Trey Lance news?
I believe he is because I look at 7th-round draft capital, and maybe he runs Kyle Shanahan's offense just flawlessly perfect. But I think we've also seen situations where if you followed football long enough, you've seen those situations. And I'm thinking back to like Derek Anderson that one year in Cleveland, where Derek Anderson had like 30 touchdown passes, made the Pro Bowl. It was him and Braylon Allen, and Browns fans were like, "We got our guy. We got Derek Anderson as a Pro Bowler. We're all set." But that was over. Like one off season, that was over. And we've seen, I think in sports, if you just follow sports in general, you see when guys get on rolls and you see that when they are producing above maybe where their talent level lies. And Purdy, in my mind, is a bet on if he doesn't maintain that production, how willing is Shanahan going to be to stick with him? If it turns sideways quick, is he going to get benched quick? But the other thing too is a lot of these times, I think now's a good time of year to move like Brock Purdy or Desmond Ridder or those types of players. Last year would have been a good time to move Davis Mills because Davis Mills was stepping in as the starting quarterback for Houston. And we love to romanticize. We love to have hope. We love to tell ourselves, hey, if everything works right, I've got this young starting quarterback in Dynasty. I'm all set on Superflex. And we see, I think more often than not, those iffy guys end up wrong. And if new quarterbacks drafted and different direction comes in, I think for the 49ers, if it's a different direction, it would probably be a veteran. Maybe a guy like Kirk Cousins would be an option. But the long term, they're not married to Brock Purdy. He's a pretty hot date for him right now, and they're really enjoying the time with that. But there's no ring that has been purchased yet. So I think that's the biggest thing on Purdy when it comes to holding him or selling him in Dynasty.
Yeah, and that draft capital goes overlooked so many
Yeah.
times because not only that's not to say that somebody with low draft capital can't be good. I mean, Dak Prescott was drafted in the 4th
Yeah.
and he's been the starter for, since his rookie season. But what it does to a front office, their salary, they're not tied to him. There's no guaranteed money there. So the ability to move on from that player is so much easier than it is from somebody like Trey Lance, who has, 5 million guaranteed next year, even if they trade him. So that's definitely a good point. Talking about preseason hype, how do you exploit preseason hype to get a good value on one of these sell candidates?
by exploiting preseason hype to get a good value on one of these sell candidates. I mean, you're looking for those bubbles, and we're playing analyst leagues and those types of things. You get a little bit of a cheat code because you can go to somebody's Twitter, and if they're just lighting it up, gushing about Brock Purdy, I mean, you found your option that you're able to sell Brock Purdy, and so those are just different things that tricks of the trade. If you're in a league that your league mates talk about things and see things one way, and in really long time dynasty leagues, you can kind of tell. I have a long time league with my friends, and like this guy's the rookie guy and this guy is the hype guy, and so you have those avenues and it really comes down to knowing your league and kind of identifying the personality traits of those leagues, but also using your context clues, being a little bit of a detective and figure out, well, this is the guy that is really in on this guy. So like if you play in a league with me, come to me with an offer with James Cook, and we're talking. So that's how you exploit the hype. Just find Jeff talking about James Cook and go with it.
And we almost throw ourselves under the bus, right? Because we do talk about our favorite players on Twitter. So it makes it very hard to keep our cards close to our chest when that comes around. I know that all of my home league mates are definitely going to use all of my picks against me. They've already told me in the chat, but it's still very good things and very good advice to know going forward. So I've kept you. It's already been 30 minutes. I can't believe it. It's
I
been
know.
so great talking to you. Before you get out of here, let everybody know where to find you, where to follow you, and what you've got coming up.
Well, I just want to start by saying thank you so much. I know we played in Scott Fish Bowl a couple years ago, and it was a lot of fun. And so it was great seeing you in Canton, and I love what you're doing here. And I saw the other day the stuff with ESPN going on, and you're just a rising star, Britt, and I love to see it. And so thank you so much for having this time. You can find me with Football Guys. You can find me with on Twitter, for whom J Bell tolls the number 4. Those are going to be the primary 2 avenues. You can find me with the Devy Royale as well, working through the Patreon, those types of things, the Discord there. And so, but really the involvement is with Football Guys. That's where most of my content's coming out. I've got articles that I'm writing, way too many articles. And then I do the Dynasty Football Show with Football Guys that comes out weekly.
So we're all super slammed. It's football season, y'all. There's
It
a ton
is.
of content. Jeff, thank you again so much. I look forward to seeing you. Hopefully we can get into another league together sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Have a great weekend.
See ya.
All right, guys. Did we get our sponges in? Did we absorb all of that great information? Because there was just so much there. Awesome stuff from Jeff Bell, as always. Next, let's get into some underdog. Underdog fantasy is amazing. I know that I love to play preseason on there, and Britt's Fantasy Blitz happens to be sponsored by Underdog Fantasy, and it is the biggest fantasy tournament of all time going on Underdog right now with Best Ball Mania 4. If you don't know what Best Ball is, it's really simple. You just enter the Best Ball Mania on Underdog's mobile app, you draft your team, and that's it. There are no waivers, no week to week management. You draft your team, and Underdog optimizes the score for so that you can put forth the best score weekly. Best Ball Mania 4 also has a prize, first place prize of $3 million. If you get signed up on fantasyalarm.com/underdog or on the App Store, sign up with promo code ALARM and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's 4 free entries into the Best Ball Mania 4 competition for your chance to win $3 million. Once you've signed up, be on the lookout for some upcoming Best Ball drafts during Alarm Fantasy Football next week. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Alarm, at Britt_Flinn, at Coupe Fiasco, and at Roto Buzz Guy for updates on when those are happening and how to get in and draft with us on some of those underdog best ball drafts. Today, however, I want to talk about some player stats for tonight's preseason games and look at some stats for the NFL season. So, we kind of touched on the preseason games earlier, and I'm looking at some of these stats. And first, I've got to go with Lions wide receiver Chase Cota, who is set with a stat line of 28 and a half receiving yards. Cota is an undrafted free agent out of Oregon, but through 2 preseason games, he's put up 69 receiving yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. He's been one of the most impressive rookie receivers in the preseason. He's leading in first down receptions, comes in second in plays of 15 yards or more, and was in the top 5 in receiving yards after week 1. He also played 42 snaps in week 1 alone, and with Detroit resting their starters tonight, I expect to see him a lot. So I am taking higher than 28 and a half yards tonight with Chase Coda. Also with the Lions, I'm also looking at Teddy Bridgewater to go lower than 68 and a half passing yards. The Lions already know what they have in him. He's a veteran, he's been in the league forever. And even though they're not playing their starters, I think that Nate Sudfeld takes the bulk of the reps tonight. In the last preseason game, Bridgewater only had 34 yards on 20 snaps, and I expect much of the same tonight. Next, on the other side of the ball, I'm looking at Shi Smith, the wide receiver out of Carolina, higher than 31 and a half receiving yards. During last week's game against the Giants, he saw a team leading 5 targets for 59 yards and looked very good with 14.8 yards per route run. Again, with the Lions sitting all their starters, Smith should be able to recreate similar stats and again hit that higher. For the Patriots and the Titans, I'm looking at Bailey Zappi, lower than 111 and a half passing yards. In the first 2 preseason games, Zappi only had 196 combined yards. And since this is the last game, we may see more of Trace McSorley and Malik Cunningham behind kind of that makeshift offensive line. Finally, I also like Kayshon Boutte, higher than 25.5 receiving yards. This one is a little iffy as he only saw 2 targets in the last preseason game, but he did catch both and ended up with 49 yards. He was an electric playmaker at LSU, and he was also considered to be on the roster bubble at the beginning of camp. So, in this final game, I wouldn't be surprised to see him out there a little more tonight to help solidify that decision and see if they want to keep him on the roster or not. Underdog also has NFL season stats, and this is something that I love, especially if preseason isn't your thing. So let's hit some of these real quick before we get out of here on this beautiful Friday. First, I'm looking at Josh Allen's 6.5 rushing touchdowns, and I'm going to go higher. Allen has had 7 last season. He had 6 the year before that and 8 the year before that. I know that the Bills have said that they're trying to run him less to preserve his body and health, but when they get on the goal line situations, I still see him utilizing the sneak and vulturing those touchdowns from the running backs. James Cook's stats are also only set at 3.5 rushing touchdowns on underdog. So to me, that seems like Josh Allen is still going to have a big role at the goal line and get higher than those touchdowns. Next, let's look at Justin Herbert, higher than 4,490 passing yards. I know that this number is a little bit high, but Herbert has passed for more than that each year in the league except for his rookie season. And he did so last year, missing Keenan Allen and Mike Williams for a good portion of the season. Now, with Kellen Moore at offensive coordinator, I really expect a high flying passing game, so he should easily be able to go higher. Let's continue this trend and go higher on David Montgomery's 6.5 rushing touchdowns. Dan Campbell has said that this backfield will be a 2-headed monster, and with Jahmyr Gibbs handling a large amount of the passing work, I see Montgomery getting plenty of the rushing work. This is higher for me all the way. Sticking with the running backs, I'm also looking at Najee Harris at higher than 7 rushing touchdowns. He had 10 his first 2 seasons, and despite the Jalen Warren hype, we mentioned it earlier, that Matt Canada has already come out and said that Harris is unequivocally the starter. The Steelers have a better offensive line than they have in years past, and I think that Harris hits this easily. Finally, let's look at a receiver and go with Alan Lazard higher than 4.5 touchdowns. Lazard has been Aaron Rodgers' security blanket in the end zone over the past 2 seasons. And now, with Corey Davis announcing his retirement, Lazard has the wide receiver 2 role locked in. I will take that all day long. So that wraps up our underdog picks of the day. If you guys have any questions in the chat before we get out of here, let me know. But again, if you want to sign up for Underdog Fantasy, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog, use the promo code ALARM, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Along with these pick'em contests, they are also running best ball contests, including Best Ball Mania 4. They have weekly contests and their new weekly winners best ball, as well as one that was announced earlier this week, the Eliminator contest, which Andrew Cooper has an article about over on Fantasy Alarm. There's honestly something for everyone here. So get on over there, check it out. And again, keep your eye out for next week's family best ball drafts on the Alarm Fantasy Football Show. So that about wraps it up for us today, guys. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Friday. Rushman, thank you so much. You have a great weekend as well. Articles coming up this next week on fantasyalarm.com. The fantasy football cheat sheet has just been updated, so you're all ready to go for your drafts this weekend. We've also got some upcoming shows on Better Sports Network. We've got from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, Better Sports Betting with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender. From 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, we also have the MLB DFS live stream with James Grande and John Impemba. Don't forget to go over to Fantasy Alarm, pick up your copy of the draft guide of the cheat sheet, or sign up for the All Pro package and get a 7-day free trial going to fantasyalarm.com/allpro. Mr. Scampers in the chat says 10-team home league live draft tomorrow, half PPR. Where do I like drafting from? I've kind of drafted all over the place, but this year I kind of like drafting towards the back. I like being on that turn and I like being able to reach with nobody suspecting my next move and being a little bit sneaky. So that's going to do it for us today on this beautiful Friday. Tune in next Monday with special guest Justin Finsterman. We're going to talk some ADP risers and fallers, a few other things. Of course, we'll always cover the news. And thank you guys so much for getting blitzed with me on Friday. We'll see you Monday.